My name is Sophia, and I was 15 when my mother abandoned me at the airport. I still remember the casual shrug as she handed me $200 and walked away with her new husband and his children. That moment at Gate 27 shattered everything I thought I knew about family and love. What I never expected was how that devastating betrayal would lead me to discover the truth about my past and ultimately change my life forever. Before I tell you how I went from abandoned at Gate 27 to finding my true family, let me know where you are watching from and hit that like and subscribe button. Trust me, you will want to stick around for what happened when my mother returned to find my room completely empty. My early childhood memories with my mother were mostly happy ones. I remember weekend trips to the local park where she would push me on the swings until my stomach fluttered with excitement. On my 6th birthday, she baked a lopsided chocolate cake and decorated our tiny apartment with handmade paper streamers. We did not have much, but we had each other, and back then, that seemed like enough. Everything changed when I was 8 years old. I came home from school one day to find my parents sitting stiffly on opposite ends of our worn couch. The air felt heavy with tension as they explained they were getting a divorce. The explanation was minimal, a generic, sometimes adults stop loving each other, that left me with more questions than answers. I remembered crying myself to sleep that night, clutching my stuffed rabbit as the muffled sounds of their arguments filtered through my bedroom wall. My mother received primary custody, and my father quickly faded from my life. Weekends with him dwindled from every other weekend to once a month, then to occasional phone calls that became increasingly awkward and brief. By the time I was 10, he was little more than a name on my birth certificate and a fading memory. Life as a single-parent household was not easy. My mother worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat, waitressing during the day and cleaning office buildings at night. I became accustomed to microwave dinners and letting myself into our apartment with the key I wore on a string around my neck. Despite the financial struggles, there was a certain stability in our routine. I understood the rules, knew what was expected of me, and never doubted that I was the center of my mother's world. When I was 13, everything changed again. My mother met Richard at the restaurant where she worked. He was a wealthy businessman who left extravagant tips and asked for her section whenever he dined there. I still remember the first time she mentioned him, her cheeks flushed with excitement as she described his expensive suit and the way he looked at her like she was someone special. Their romance progressed with whirlwind speed. Within 6 months, Richard had proposed with a diamond ring so large it looked comically out of place on my mother's work-worn hand. Before I had time to adjust to the idea of having a stepfather, we were moving into his sprawling suburban mansion, complete with a pool, home theater, and more bathrooms than I could count. The house came with 3 additional residents, Richard's children from his previous marriage. Isabella was 14, just a year older than me, with a perpetual look of disdain that made me feel instantly inferior. Mason was 12, quiet and withdrawn, barely acknowledging my existence. The youngest, Emma, was 10, and initially the most welcoming, although that friendliness quickly faded once we were all under the same roof. From the beginning, it was clear that I did not fit into this ready-made family. Richard was polite but distant, reserving his genuine smiles and affection for his own children. Family dinners became exercises in discomfort as Richard and my mother discussed private schools, country club memberships, and vacation homes, topics from a world I had never been part of. When I spoke, My comments about school or books were met with polite nods before the conversation shifted back to the stepchildren's accomplishments in tennis, debate club, or piano recitals. What hurt most was watching my mother transform. The woman who had once cut coupons and shopped clearance racks now spoke knowledgeably about designer brands and exclusive restaurants. She colored her hair, whitened her teeth, and began referring to our previous life as the struggle years, with an uncomfortable laugh whenever Richard's friends were around. It was as if she was shedding her old skin and, along with it, the parts of herself connected to me. I tried desperately to fit in with my new step-siblings. I offered to help Isabella with her math homework, complimented Emma's artwork, and asked Mason about his video game collection. My attempts were met with cool politeness at best and outright rejection at worst. One particularly painful memory was overhearing Isabella tell her friends on the phone that her dad's new wife came with baggage, meaning me. As summer approached, Richard announced a family vacation to Thailand. 2 weeks at an exclusive resort with private villas and personal butlers. Despite the growing distance between my mother and me, I felt a surge of excitement. Perhaps this trip would be a chance to finally bond with my new family away from the pressures of school and everyday life. My hopes were quickly dampened when my mother took the stepchildren shopping for new vacation clothes but did not include me. When I asked why, she casually mentioned that I had plenty of clothes already, despite the fact that most of mine were from our life before Richard. I ended up using the money I had saved from babysitting to buy myself a new swimsuit, a modest blue one-piece that paled in comparison to the designer bikinis Isabella and Emma would be bringing. A week before the trip, I overheard a concerning conversation between my mother and Richard. They were in their bedroom with the door slightly ajar, unaware that I was passing by on my way to the kitchen. "What about the arrangements for Sophia?" Richard asked, his voice low. "All taken care of," my mother replied, with a dismissive tone that made my stomach clench. "She will not be a problem." When I questioned her about it later, she brushed off my concerns with a breezy, "Just trip details, honey, nothing for you to worry about." The morning of our departure arrived with chaos and excitement. The house was a flurry of activity as suitcases were loaded into Richard's luxury SUV. I noticed that my passport was not with the stack of travel documents on the kitchen counter. But when I mentioned this to my mother, she muttered something about having it in her purse and hurried me along. Looking back, I should have seen the signs. The way my mother avoided making eye contact as we drove to the airport. How no one discussed my seating assignment on the plane when they were debating who would get the window seats. The fact that my suitcase was mysteriously smaller than everyone else's. But at 15, desperate to believe I was part of this family, I ignored the warning bells ringing in my mind. The international terminal was a chaotic maze of travelers, rolling suitcases and harried airline staff. Richard led our group through the crowd with practiced efficiency, my mother at his side, clutching her designer handbag. Isabella, Mason, and Emma followed closely behind, their faces bright with anticipation. I trailed at the back, struggling to keep up while rolling my small suitcase. When we reached the check-in counter, Richard presented the passports and confirmation details to the airline attendant. I noticed he handed over 5 passports, not 6. A knot formed in my stomach as I watched boarding passes being distributed to each family member except me. "Excuse me," I said, stepping forward. "I think you forgot my boarding pass." The airline attendant looked confused. "I only have 5 passengers listed for this reservation." Richard cleared his throat. "Your mother needs to speak with you about that. We will go ahead to security." As the stepchildren and Richard moved away with the luggage cart, my mother took my elbow and guided me to a quiet corner near a gift shop. Her face wore an expression I had never seen before, a strange mix of detachment and mild annoyance. "Listen, Sophia," she said, her voice unnaturally calm. "There has been a change of plans. You are not coming with us to Thailand." The words hit me like a physical blow. What? Why? Did I do something wrong? She sighed, glancing over at Richard and the children waiting by the security line. "Richard thinks this should be a trip just for us and his kids, a chance to really bond as a family." "But I am family too," I protested, my voice cracking. "I am your daughter." "Do not make a scene," she hissed, digging into her purse. She pulled out a wad of cash and pressed it into my hand. "Here is $200. You can figure it out. Just take an Uber home." I stared at the money in disbelief. "You are leaving me at the airport alone. I do not even have a house key." She gave that casual shrug that would haunt my dreams for years to come. "Mrs. Henderson next door has the spare. You'll be fine. You're mature for your age." Tears welled in my eyes as the full reality of what was happening crashed over me. Please, you cannot do this." "Richard is waiting," she said, glancing nervously toward the security checkpoint. "This vacation is important for our future, Sophia. Sometimes we all have to make sacrifices." "A sacrifice would be giving up a concert ticket or postponing a shopping trip," I said, anger finally breaking through my shock. "This is abandonment." She flinched at the word, but quickly composed herself. "Do not be so dramatic. It's just 2 weeks. The refrigerator is stocked, and I left money for pizza in the kitchen drawer." She leaned in and planted a quick, dry kiss on my forehead. "I will call you when we land." With that, she turned and walked away, her designer heels clicking on the airport tile as she rejoined Richard and the stepchildren. I watched in stunned silence as they proceeded through security, my mother never once looking back. Isabella caught my eye briefly and smirked before they disappeared from view. I stood rooted to the spot, the $200 clutched in my trembling hand. Around me, the airport continued its normal rhythm. Travelers rushing to destinations, families hugging goodbye, airline announcements echoing overhead. But for me, time seemed to stop as the magnitude of my mother's betrayal sank in. The tears came without warning, hot and fast, streaming down my face as I sank onto a nearby bench. A few passersby gave me curious or concerned glances, but no one stopped. In an airport, a crying teenager was just another piece of the landscape, easily overlooked and quickly forgotten. I spent the next hour in a daze, watching the departure board as their flight status changed from boarding to departed. Each update was another twist of the knife. I tried calling my mother's cell phone repeatedly, but the calls went straight to voicemail. My text messages showed as delivered but remained unanswered. "Having fun at the airport?" I finally texted, anger temporarily overwhelming hurt. "Hope abandoning your child was worth the first-class upgrade." No response came, not that I really expected one. By now, my mother would be settling into her seat, perhaps sipping champagne next to Richard, relieved to have shed the burden of her previous life, including me. As afternoon stretched into evening, my situation became increasingly precarious. An airport security officer approached me as I sat in the food court, nursing a soda I had purchased to justify occupying the table. "Everything okay, miss?" he asked, his expression a mix of suspicion and concern. "You have been here for several hours now." "I am waiting for my ride," I lied, avoiding his eyes. "They got stuck in traffic." He seemed unconvinced, but nodded and moved on after advising me not to leave my bag unattended. I felt a new wave of humiliation wash over me. How could I admit that my own mother had abandoned me? The words stuck in my throat, held back by a combination of shame and lingering loyalty. As evening crowds thinned and the airport shops began closing their security gates, the reality of my situation became impossible to ignore. The $200 would not last long, and even if I made it back to the house, I would be alone for 2 weeks with no transportation and limited funds. As I scrolled through my contacts, a name caught my eye that made my heart skip. Dad. I had not spoken to him in over 3 years. Our last conversation had been a brief, awkward phone call on my 12th birthday. After that, he seemed to disappear completely. My mother had always implied that he was not interested in being part of my life, that he had moved on. "Your father has a new life now," she would say whenever I asked about him. "Some men just are not cut out for fatherhood." I stared at his contact information, my thumb hovering over the call button. What if he rejected me too? What if my mother had been telling the truth and he wanted nothing to do with me? The thought of another abandonment felt unbearable. In the end, desperation won out over pride. With trembling fingers, I pressed the call button and held my breath as the phone rang. Once, twice, 3 times. I was about to hang up when a deep voice answered. "Hello?" The sound of his voice, so familiar yet strange, momentarily robbed me of speech. "Hello? Is anyone there?" he asked again. "Dad," I finally managed, my voice small and uncertain. "Sophia, is that you, sweetheart?" The concern in his voice cracked something inside me. "Dad, I need help," I said, and then the whole story came pouring out in a rush of words punctuated by sobs. "She left you alone at the airport?" His voice had changed, a hard edge replacing the initial shock. "Where are you now? Which airport?" I told him, half expecting him to offer to call a social service agency or perhaps wire me money for a hotel. "Stay exactly where you are," he said firmly. "I am coming to get you myself. It will take me about 3 hours to reach you. Can you stay safe until then?" "You were coming here?" I asked, disbelief evident in my voice. "You do not have to do that. Maybe you could just help me get home." "Sophia," he interrupted, "I am coming to get you. Find the customer service desk for the airline your mother was flying with. Tell them your situation. I will call ahead and make sure they take care of you until I arrive." After he hung up, I sat in the bathroom stall for several minutes trying to process what had just happened. My father, who I had believed wanted nothing to do with me, was dropping everything to come to my rescue. It seemed too good to be true, and a lifetime of disappointments had taught me to be wary of hope. Nevertheless, I followed his instructions. The airline staff were immediately sympathetic. They escorted me to a private waiting area, brought me a sandwich and some juice, and assured me they would watch over me until my father arrived. "Unfortunately, this happens more often than you would think," the customer service manager told me quietly. "Parents changing plans at the last minute, leaving kids to fend for themselves." The 3-hour wait felt both endless and surreal. I drifted between hope, fear, and exhaustion. What if my father did not show up? What if he did, but resented having to rescue me? What if this was all an elaborate setup for another rejection? Just as I was beginning to doze off in the uncomfortable airport chair, a voice came over the PA system. "Attention, please. Will Sophia Williams please come to the information desk? Sophia Williams to the information desk, please." My heart leapt into my throat as I gathered my small suitcase and followed an airline employee who had come to escort me. Instead of heading to the main terminal, however, we walked through a series of corridors and security checkpoints until we reached what appeared to be a private terminal section. "Your father has arranged for you to meet him here," the employee explained as we approached glass doors leading to the tarmac. That was when I saw it. A sleek private jet with stairs descending from its door. And walking down those stairs was a tall man in a business suit, his familiar profile causing my breath to catch. My father looked different than I remembered. His dark hair was now streaked with silver at the temples, and he carried himself with the confidence I did not recall from childhood. But his eyes, when they found mine, were exactly as I remembered, kind and crinkled at the corners. For a moment, we both froze, taking each other in across the distance. Then he strode forward, closing the gap between us in seconds. He stopped just short of embracing me, uncertainty written across his features. "Sophia," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I cannot believe it is really you." I did not know what to say or do. Part of me wanted to throw myself into his arms like the little girl who used to greet him at the door. Another part, the wounded teenager who had felt abandoned by both parents, held back. He seemed to sense my hesitation. "I am so sorry," he said quietly, "for everything. For not being there, for not fighting harder to stay in your life." Something in his sincerity broke through my defenses. "She said you did not want to see me anymore," I choked out, "that you had moved on." His face darkened. That was never true, not for a single day. He tentatively opened his arms, and this time I did not hesitate, stepping into his embrace and letting out years of pent-up grief against his shoulder. We stood like that for several minutes, both of us overcome with emotion. When we finally separated, he kept one arm around my shoulders as he guided me toward the waiting plane. "Let us get you out of here," he said gently. "We can talk properly once we are in the air." The interior of the private jet was unlike anything I had ever experienced. Plush leather seats, polished wood tables, and soft lighting created an atmosphere of quiet luxury. A flight attendant greeted us warmly and offered me a selection of drinks and snacks. As we settled into seats facing each other, I could not help but stare at my father in wonder. "Is this your plane?" He smiled, a hint of embarrassment crossing his features. "The company's, technically. I am the CEO of Horizon Technologies now." "CEO?" I echoed in disbelief. My mother had always described him as struggling financially, barely able to make child support payments. "It has been a successful few years," he said simply, then leaned forward, his expression growing serious. "Sophia, I need you to know something. I have been trying to contact you for years. Birthday cards, Christmas gifts, phone calls, all of it. When your mother remarried and moved, I lost track of you completely. I hired private investigators who could not find your new address. I filed motions with the court that were somehow lost or delayed." My mind reeled as the implications of what he was saying sank in. "She kept you away from me on purpose." He nodded, pain evident in his eyes. "I have been sending child support and additional money every month since the divorce. Money you never saw, I take it." I thought of the secondhand clothes, the times we had eaten ramen noodles for days straight, my mother's constant complaints about financial struggles. "We were always broke," I whispered. "She said you barely paid child support." My father opened his briefcase and removed a folder, handing it to me. Inside were copies of cash checks, court documents, and records of attempted communications, all neatly organized by date. The evidence of his efforts and my mother's deception was overwhelming. "I do not show you this to hurt you," he said gently, "but you deserve to know the truth." As the plane took off, carrying me away from the airport where my mother had abandoned me, I felt strangely weightless, as if I were shedding years of misunderstandings and manipulations with each passing mile. My father explained that he lived in Denver now, running the tech company he had helped found. Shortly after the divorce, what had begun as a small startup had grown into a major player in the industry, bringing him success he had never anticipated. "I kept your room ready," he said, a touch of embarrassment coloring his voice. "All these years, just in case." The flight passed quickly as we began the delicate process of getting to know each other again. There were awkward pauses and moments of overwhelming emotion, but underneath it all was a current of genuine connection that felt both new and familiar. When we landed, a car was waiting to take us to his home. I pressed my face to the window as we drove through upscale neighborhoods before turning onto a private drive that wound up a hillside. The house that came into view took my breath away. A modern structure of glass and stone perched on a cliff overlooking the mountains. "Home sweet home," my father said, watching my reaction with a mix of pride and nervousness. "I hope you will be comfortable here." A woman named Linda greeted us at the door. I initially tensed, wondering if she was my father's wife, but he quickly introduced her as his executive assistant who had helped prepare for my arrival. "I have set up the blue bedroom for Sophia," she told my father. "Fresh towels in the ensuite bathroom, and I stocked the kitchen with groceries. The security team has been updated to include her in the household." My father thanked her, and she departed with a warm smile in my direction. He then gave me a tour of the house, each room more beautiful than the last. When we reached what would be my bedroom, I stopped short in the doorway, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness evident in every detail. The room was painted a soft blue, with large windows overlooking the mountains. A plush, queen-sized bed dominated one wall, while a desk, bookshelf, and comfortable reading chair created a perfect study nook by the window. But what caught my eye was the collection of items on the dresser. "Are those?" I moved closer, unable to complete the question. My father nodded, his expression tender. "Birthday and Christmas presents. Every year since I lost contact with you, I cannot deliver them, but I cannot bear not to buy them either." Arranged chronologically were gifts appropriate for each age I had been, still in their original wrapping paper. Beside them sat a photo album, labeled simply Sophia. With trembling hands, I opened it to find what few photos my father had managed to collect of me growing up. School pictures my mother must have sent during the early years after the divorce, a newspaper clipping of me receiving an academic award in 6th grade, a blurry photo that appeared to have been taken from a distance of me leaving my old school. "You really did try to stay in my life," I whispered, the reality finally sinking in. "Every single day," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. "And I am not going anywhere now, if you will let me be your dad again." That first night in my new home, we shared a meal delivered from a local restaurant, neither of us quite ready to tackle cooking. The conversation flowed more easily as exhaustion lowered my guards and food restored my energy. For the first time in years, I felt seen and heard, my thoughts and feelings given value and consideration. As I finally crawled into the impossibly soft bed in my new room, emotional and physical exhaustion overtook me. My last conscious thought before drifting off to sleep was that perhaps being abandoned at the airport was not the ending I had feared, but rather the beginning I had always needed. I awoke the next morning momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar softness of the bed and the sound of wind through the pine trees outside. Then the events of the previous day came rushing back, and I sat up, taking in my new surroundings in the clear light of morning. After showering in the ensuite bathroom, which featured a rainfall showerhead and more toiletries than I had ever owned, I dressed in yesterday's clothes and ventured downstairs. I found my father in the kitchen, attempting to make pancakes with limited success. "Good morning," he said, looking up with a smile that turned sheepish as he gestured to the misshapen pancake in the pan. "I thought I would make breakfast, but it seems my cooking skills have not improved since you were little." The memory surfaced unbidden. Sunday mornings when he would attempt pancakes while my mother slept in. They were always oddly shaped, sometimes burned, but he had served them with such pride that I never complained. "I remember your pancakes," I said, sliding onto a stool at the kitchen island. "You used to make smiley faces with chocolate chips." His face lit up. "You remember that? You were so young." "Some things stick with you," I replied, accepting the plate he offered. Despite their appearance, the pancakes tasted good, and the normalcy of sharing breakfast helped ease the awkwardness between us. After we ate, my father gave me a proper tour of the house and grounds. The property was expansive, with manicured gardens leading down to a private hiking trail access. "I have some people I would like you to meet today," he said, as we returned to the main living area, "if you feel up to it." An hour later, I found myself sitting across from a distinguished woman in her 50s who introduced herself as Margaret Chen, family law attorney. "What your mother did constitutes abandonment under the law," she explained, her tone professional but kind. "Leaving a minor without proper care arrangements is illegal. Additionally, there appears to be financial misconduct regarding the child support payments your father has been making." I shifted uncomfortably in my seat. "I do not want to get my mom in trouble. I just want to be safe and secure," Margaret finished for me. "I understand, but we need to establish legal protection for you, especially if you wish to remain with your father." My father, who had been quietly listening, leaned forward. "Sophia, the choice is ultimately yours, but I am prepared to seek full custody if that is what you want." "Can I really choose?" I asked. "You are 15, Margaret said. "The court gives significant weight to the preferences of children your age, especially in cases involving abandonment or neglect." 2 days after my arrival, as I was beginning to settle into a tentative routine with my father, my mother finally called. I stared at her name on my phone screen, a maelstrom of emotions rendering me temporarily paralyzed. "You do not have to answer," my father said gently, noticing my distress. After 4 rings, the call went to voicemail. A minute later, a notification appeared indicating she had left a message. With trembling fingers, I pressed play and put the phone on speaker. "Sophia, honey, there seems to have been a terrible misunderstanding," my mother's voice emerged, falsely bright. "I thought you understood the plan was for you to stay home during our trip. Richard felt it would be good for you to have some independence, and I agreed. I did not abandon you, sweetie. That is such a harsh word. Call me back so we can clear this up. The resort Wi-Fi is spotty, but I will try to check my messages. Love you." The blatant rewriting of reality made my stomach churn. There had been no plan for me to stay home, no discussion of independence. She had abandoned me without warning and was now attempting to make me doubt my own experience. "Classic," my father muttered, shaking his head. "She has not changed at all." I decided not to return the call. Instead, with the support of Margaret and my father, I made the decision to stay in Denver permanently. The attorney began the process of filing for a change in custody, gathering evidence of my mother's abandonment and financial misconduct. 1 week after my arrival in Denver, my father and Margaret suggested it was time to retrieve my belongings from my mother's house. With her still in Thailand for another week, we had the perfect opportunity to enter the house legally and collect my personal items without confrontation. 3 days before my mother was scheduled to return from Thailand, my father and I, accompanied by Margaret and her assistant, arrived at the house I had shared with my mother and Richard family. Using my key, I opened the front door to find the house exactly as it had been left, eerily silent and undisturbed. Walking into that space as essentially a visitor was a disorienting experience. Familiar surroundings suddenly felt foreign, as if I were seeing them through new eyes. The photographs on the walls, I noticed for the first time, featured primarily Richard and his children, with my mother occasionally included. There were almost no images of me, and none at all of me with my mother. "Where's your room?" my father asked quietly, his hand a reassuring presence on my shoulder. I led him upstairs to the smallest bedroom at the end of the hall, the one furthest from the master suite. Opening the door revealed my modest space, neat but impersonal, lacking the touches of indulgence visible in the stepchildren's rooms we had passed. "This was your room?" My father's voice held a note of disbelief as he took in the basic furnishings and lack of decorative elements. "It is fine," I said automatically, the defensive response ingrained after years of being told I should be grateful for what I had. His expression softened. "No, sweetheart, it is not fine. You deserved better." With the help of the movers, we began the process of packing my belongings. Clothes went into wardrobe boxes, books and school supplies into smaller cartons. I was selective about what I took, leaving behind anything that had been gifts from my mother or Richard, taking only what truly belonged to me or held sentimental value. As I cleared my desk drawers, I found a box of keepsakes I had almost forgotten, pushed to the back of the bottom drawer. Inside were photos from before the divorce, a few birthday cards my father had sent in the early years after the separation, and a small teddy bear he had given me on my 5th birthday. "You kept these?" he said, his voice thick with emotion as I showed him the mementos. "I never really believed she was telling the truth about you not caring," I admitted. "Not completely." In my closet, behind a row of shoes, I discovered something that made my blood run cold. A stack of envelopes, bound with a rubber band, all addressed to me in my father's handwriting. With shaking hands, I opened the first one to find a birthday card for my 13th birthday, containing a heartfelt message and a gift card that had never been used. One by one, I opened the envelopes, each containing evidence of my father's continued efforts to remain in my life. Cards for every birthday and Christmas, a letter explaining his new address and phone number when he moved to Denver, photos of him at his company headquarters with a note saying he hoped I would visit someday. "She kept all of these from me?" I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "All this time I thought you had forgotten about me." My father pulled me into a tight embrace. "Never, not for a single day." As the movers continued their work, I wandered into my mother's home office, drawn by a need to understand why she had gone to such lengths to separate me from my father. In a folder labeled "Divorce," I found financial records that confirmed what my father had told me. Monthly child support payments, far larger than what my mother had claimed to receive, had been deposited regularly into an account I had never known existed. There were also court documents showing my father's repeated petitions for visitation, all opposed by my mother with various fabricated excuses. Most damning of all was a draft of a letter to her attorney dated around the time she met Richard, outlining a strategy to minimize the father's influence as she integrated into her new partner's life. I was referred to as a complication that needed to be managed carefully to ensure Richard's continued interest. By late afternoon, the packing was complete. As the movers loaded the last of the boxes into their truck, I sat at my now empty desk and wrote the letter I had been composing in my mind for days. "Dear Mom," it began. I poured out my feelings of betrayal, not just from the airport abandonment, but from years of being made to feel like an inconvenience. I explained that I had found the hidden letters and financial records, that I knew the truth about her systematic campaign to keep my father from me. "I am choosing to live with Dad now," I wrote near the end, "not as revenge, but because I deserve to be somewhere I am wanted and valued. I hope someday you will understand the damage your choices have caused, not just to me, but to yourself. Despite everything, I do not hate you, but I need to love myself enough to leave." I placed the letter on the stripped mattress of what had been my bed, the white paper stark against the bare blue sheet. As a final touch, I left the house key beside it, a symbolic relinquishment of my place in this household. Walking out of that house for the last time, I felt a complex mixture of grief, relief, and resolution. My father waited by the car, his expression concerned. "All done?" he asked. I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. He seemed to understand, opening the car door for me without further questions. As we drove away, I did not look back at the house. Instead, I looked forward, toward the future I was now free to create. My mother returned from Thailand 3 days later. Within hours, my phone exploded with notifications, a barrage of increasingly frantic messages. "Where are you? Why is your room empty? Call me immediately. Sophia, this is not funny. Come home right now. I just spoke to your father's lawyer. How could you do this to me after everything I have done for you? Please come home, sweetie. We can work this out. I miss you." The messages cycled through anger, manipulation, and false contrition in a predictable pattern. I showed them to my father and Margaret, who advised me not to respond until the legal proceedings were further along. A week after her return, my mother showed up unannounced at my father's house, having somehow obtained the address. The security system alerted us to her presence at the gate, her luxury SUV visible on the monitor as she repeatedly pressed the intercom button. "You do not have to see her," my father assured me. "We can have security turn her away." But I knew this confrontation was inevitable and perhaps necessary. "I will talk to her, but I want you and Margaret there too." My mother's face, when the front door opened, was a study in conflicting emotions. Relief at finding me battling with outrage at the situation. She wore an expensive sundress and designer sunglasses pushed up into her perfectly highlighted hair, the picture of affluent suburbia. "Sophia, thank God!" she exclaimed, stepping forward as if to embrace me. I took an instinctive step back, and her arms dropped to her sides. "What is going on? Why did you leave? Why are you with him?" The last word was infused with such venom that I flinched. "Perhaps we should continue this conversation inside," my father suggested, his voice calm but firm. Once seated in the living room, with Margaret present as both legal counsel and witness, my mother's facade began to crack. Her eyes darted around the beautiful space, taking in the obvious wealth and taste evident in every detail. "So this is what this is about," she said with a brittle laugh. "He has lured you away with promises of luxury? I should have known." "That is not why I am here," I replied, struggling to keep my voice steady. "I am here because you abandoned me at an airport. I am here because you have been lying to me about Dad for years. I am here because I found all the letters and cards you hid from me." Her expression faltered, then hardened. "You went through my private things? How dare you?" "They were addressed to me," I countered. "They were mine to read." "You are 15 years old," she snapped. "Everything under my roof belongs to me, including your correspondence. I was protecting you from his inconsistency, his broken promises." My father, who had been silently observing, finally spoke. "There were no broken promises, Patricia. Only your systematic efforts to erase me from our daughter's life." The confrontation continued for another hour, my mother cycling through denial, anger, and desperate pleas. But nothing she said could undo years of lies and manipulation. When she finally left, defeated and alone, I felt something shift inside me. The fear of her disapproval that had controlled me for so long simply evaporated. 6 months later, the court granted my father full legal custody. I started at a new school where I was just Sophia, not the unwanted stepchild or the abandoned daughter. I made real friends who knew nothing of my past trauma and liked me for who I was becoming, not who I had been. My mother and I eventually established limited contact through supervised visits and family therapy. She never fully acknowledged the extent of her betrayal, but she stopped trying to manipulate me back into her world. Richard, unsurprisingly, divorced her within 2 years when the legal bills and custody drama became too much for his image-conscious lifestyle. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if my mother had taken me to Thailand that day. If she had chosen me over Richard's preferences, would I still be caught in the cycle of seeking her conditional approval? Would I have discovered my father's unwavering love? Would I have found my voice and purpose? These questions have no answers, of course. All I know with certainty is that families are defined not by biology or legal documents, but by the consistent choice to show up, to value, and prioritize one another. My father taught me that. My mother, in her absence, confirmed it. If you have ever felt abandoned or betrayed by someone who should have protected you, know that your worth was never determined by their failure. Their limitations are not your destiny. Family can be found and created in unexpected places if you remain open to connection even after heartbreak. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you in any way, please like this video and subscribe to Revengenius for more stories of resilience and justice. Share with someone who might need to hear that abandonment shapes but never defines us. Have you ever had to create boundaries with family members who hurt you? I would love to hear your experiences in the comments below. Remember, your story matters, and you are never as alone as you might feel in your darkest moments.